Hi everyone, and welcome to my presentation on the goddess and the snake, how ancient knowledge can help us achieve self-mastery and banish fear. So my name's Melanie Philippides. I'm here with my company called Kundalini Rising, and I offer counseling and life and wellness coaching services, and I specialize in the field of empowerment, helping people build personal power, build confidence, self-esteem, and your inner sense of authority. Essentially getting you on the path of achieving self-mastery and helping you stick to it, because when we do, we can experience inner freedom. And it's my personal belief that inner freedom is the greatest quality that we can have. Another thing about me as well is that I'm also an experienced snake handler. And it's my own personal interactions with snakes that have inspired this lecture. And I hope that this talk can help inspire and motivate you in your journey of self-development. So this is what we're going to cover. We are going to discuss the symbolic meaning of snakes that were held throughout ancient civilizations around the world, and what the association was with the serpent and the goddess. I'm going to explore the most famous story of women and the snake, which is Adam and Eve, what the story is really about, and the consequential fall of the divine feminine as a result. So that's part history class, and then we're going to shift more to psychology, about how we can employ this timeless wisdom into our lives to help benefit us in the field of empowerment. Okay, so I'm going to start by asking you, what does a snake mean to you? See, common usage of the word snake generally doesn't have a good association. Calling someone a snake normally means you're referring to someone as a backstabber, someone who's untrustworthy and deceitful, perhaps even evil and the devil itself. But it didn't always used to be this way. In fact, the whole ancient world once used to be based on serpent worship. And there's a Greek word for that, aphilatreia. On every continent, we see relics and artifacts depicting this practice everywhere. We see it from the dreamtime of the Aboriginals, the serpent god Quetzalcoatl, who was symbolized by a snake, the Kukulkan of the Mayans, Aztecs, and other Mesoamerican tribes. Over in India, we see serpent wisdom represented by Lord Shiva, the god of creation and destruction with his cobra. We see the Nagas of Hindus and Tibetan Buddhism, the yogic Kundalini, the Adders of the Druids, Gaia worship in Greece, snakes in the healing temples of Asclepius and Alexandria, and also throughout ancient Greece and Egypt, the Jedi of Egypt, the dragons of Asia, and the shamans and Native Americans' serpent wisdom, initiation, and creation story. Now, the common thread of all these cultures and myths is that the serpent takes us out of the illusion of matter and into the reality of spirit. So here's an example of serpent worship being practiced right here in the UK. So this is obviously a pictorial representation. At the moment, it's just ruins, but 26 miles away from Stonehenge, we find in Avebury in Wiltshire a serpentine temple that was the center of Druidism. In fact, the word Avebury originally was Aubrey, and this comes from the word Aubrey, which means solar snake. And the Druids had a particular fascination with snakes, and they worshipped the sun as well. We find here the Minoan snake goddess from Knossos in Crete. Now, snakes have been worshipped in ancient Greece since 7000 BC. And this is an example of how they were actually respected and revered, and they weren't feared. So let's go over the symbolism of snakes and what essentially they represent. Well, first and foremost, snakes represent life, present and everlasting. Now, this is associated with how snakes shed. They periodically shed about every 4 to 6 weeks. And in doing so, well, there's two reasons why they shed. One is that they've literally outgrown their skin. Snakes will keep growing until the day they die. And so they shed because they've outgrown their skin. But also, when they shed, they rid themselves of any mites, any dermatosis, scars, parasites. And they replete a new body covering. And in doing so, they emerge appearing revitalized and renewed. Now, our ancestors must have watched this with awe and then associated with snake as knowing all the secrets to life and death. In fact, you look into the ancient tombs in ancient Egypt and you see serpents everywhere in the funerary chambers. They were also associated with fertility and the goddess because their shedding cycles mimic the lunar monthly cycles. Associated with life force energy, most commonly known as Kundalini, And finally, they're associated with wisdom and attaining high knowledge. Going to explain Kundalini a bit more. So it's a Sanskrit word from kundal, which literally means coiled up. Now, the great Indian sages, they spoke of this primal, creative life force energy that resides within each and every one of us in a dormant state. And it needs to be activated by will, by conscious effort. They likened this power to a serpent and gave it a feminine essence. It's a primordial female energy that lives at the base of the spine, and when she's awoken, she rises up through the chakras, which are the energetic centers of our body, completely transforming the individual along the way. Now, the concept of Kundalini is actually present throughout the world under different names. We find it in China known as Qi, and also as the Holy Spirit in Christianity. And you find it in religions, not only in Hinduism, but in Gnosticism, in Buddhism, Kabbalah, and Taoism, to name a few. The mythology and ancient cultures tell us their sacred stories of creation, which is essentially the awakening of Kundalini. So the Kundalini awakening is essentially waking up to one's true self, a spiritual awakening, self-realization, self-actualization, however you wish to word it. It's widely known as a sexual energy, but this is just one aspect of it. Really, the sexual energy helps to bridge the lower and the higher chakras, and then it travels to the crown, awakening the mind. Oh, it's not showing all of it. No, okay, it's not showing all the slides, never mind. Okay, so it travels to the crown and awakening the mind, and then we enter into unity consciousness. Now, this is the essence of serpent wisdom. It's realizing that we are all one. We are all part of the same energy, and we are creators of our own reality. So here's some symbols of the snake. It's most famously associated in the Caduceus. Now, this is the Greek god Hermes, messenger of wisdom, and in Rome he was known as Mercury. So the Caduceus is a well-known sign in the medical establishment, and essentially it's a symbol of wisdom and healing. Now, the Caduceus is reminiscent of DNA, and it wasn't first found in Greece, but we actually see it earlier in ancient Egypt. So this is the Egyptian god Thoth, and here he's standing with the Caduceus, and he's initiating the Emperor Seti. And we can see in his other hand he has an ankh, and an ankh is representative of life and immortality. And here in ancient Egypt, the snake was associated with divine wisdom. We see in the temple of Asclepius. Now, Asclepius was a Greek god of medicine. His temple was actually in Egypt, and people used to come and spend the night there, and they have live snakes living in the temple. Non-venomous, of course. The Greeks really valued the respect and power of the snake and their healing capabilities. And it's not just the masculine the snake, but goddess Athena, the Greek goddess Athena, was also associated with a snake. Here are some pictures with her and her snake by her shield, very much seen as a protector and a guardian of the feminine. In fact, there used to be a live snake at the Acropolis in Athens, and this was a place that was dedicated to the goddess Athena, and the snake in this respect was seen as her guardian. So let's talk a bit more about the snake and the divine feminine. And I'm going to go all the way back to ancient Egypt. And initially, ancient Egypt was seen as a land in a very much a feminist sense. They very much worshipped the goddess, the mother goddess. And here I have a picture of a satellite view of Egypt. Now you can see starting in Upper Egypt and winding its way down, that's the Nile. If it looks from above, it looks very serpentine-like. And as it branches out into the Nile Delta in Lower Egypt, it resembles a tree, which would help to explain why Egypt was esoterically known as the land of the tree and the serpent. So let's explore some of the earliest gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt. We come to Godet Wadjet. She was one of the very first Egyptian goddesses. The name Wadjet, Waj means papyrus-colored one, and Et's an indication of her gender. So she was often depicted as a cobra, and the hieroglyphic for female was indeed a cobra, known as either the Uraeus or the Buto. And Buto is another name for Wadjet. Now, she's strongly linked with nature, as all primordial mother goddess figuses are. In fact, the papyrus plant is said to emerge from her, and she's connected to the forces of growth, fertility, and creative power. She became the patroness of the Nile Delta, most likely because cobras originate from there. So her image was worn by the pharaohs as a head ornament, indicating her protection and as a claim over the land. I'm going to skip a slide and show you here right now. So on the right, that's the mask of Tutankhamun. And right above the third eye, notice the location, the third eye, we have the uraeus there, which is essentially Wadjet. And on the left, that's her symbol. It's a solar disk encircled by a cobra. So indeed, the uraeus is an indication of divine wisdom and solar force. In fact, she actually had an oracle in the famous temple called Wadjet, which gave the city its name. An oracle with a female high priestess with a live snake offering wisdom. And we see this tradition moving on from Egypt into ancient Greece. Here we go. So this is a painting of the Pythia, which was the name given to any woman serving as the oracle at the Temple of Delphi. Now, the Temple of Delphi, the word Delphos actually means womb. And initially, the temple was a site of Gaia worship. And the giant python, in this picture, we see the snake twirled up, again, looking like the caduceus. But in the story, it was actually a giant python that was underneath the temple, guarding and protecting the oracle. Again, it's the guardian and protector of the goddess, or the divine feminine. And the legend had it that the god Apollo came and he wanted to take residency over the temple, so he killed the python. He still maintained the tradition of the Pythia and still respected the snake, and then after that, it was very much associated with gaining wisdom. In fact, supposedly, when you entered the temple, there was a plaque above the door saying, "Know thyself," which is a famous quote from Socrates and Plato. It's an invitation to gain higher knowledge in the process. And here we have Adam and Eve, probably the most well-known story of a woman and a snake. Now, this painting was done in the 16th century, which would have been about the time the Catholic and Protestant church were in full swing. Now, if you look at the painting, it starts to depict a very different picture of the feminine. If we look at Eve's expression, she looks quite a bit naughty, a bit seductive, trying to lure Adam in, and he's scratching his head, wondering what's going on. And there's that wily old snake watching the whole thing. And it's around this time that the snake started to stop being respected and revered as divinity, and instead associated with the devil. Now, it's interesting to bear in mind that in religions in which human sexuality, in both its physical and spiritual aspect, was celebrated, the snake was held with high honor. However, more later, repressive belief systems that shunned human sexuality associated the snake with evil. So I want to explore that a bit more. Let's discuss the etymology of the words devil and Satan. It comes from the word deophil, which is Anglo-Saxon for nuisance, diabolos, Greek for accuser, and Satan's a Hebrew word for adversary. Now, I highly recommend reading the works of Lawrence Gardner. He wrote a book called Revelations of the Devil, from which I get a lot of my information from. And he states that before Christian times, before the establishment of the Orthodoxy Christian Church in the 4th century, the word Satan had no sinister connotation. It's used in the Old Testament to refer to people who are just opposing what you're saying. So members of a political opposition party would have been called Satans. Annoying, but not evil. The character of the devil was actually developed from the 4th century onwards in an attempt to provide a base for the doctrine of salvation. And this is a figure of threat and evil from whom those obedient to the church could be saved. Now, bear in mind, people in this time, they didn't really read. Most people weren't read, and those who could read, they didn't have copies of the Bible. They were held privy to the clergymen of the church. So this was essentially a scare tactic. Make people think there's an outside force that could harm you, can attack you, but we can save you, and only we can save you if you follow our church and obey what we say. Out of the story of Adam and Eve comes the concept of original sin. Now, original sin says that due to the transgressions of Eve, how she disobeyed in the Garden of Evil, all babies are born sinful and under the influence of the devil, simply by having a mother. And this requires the ritual of baptism to denounce the devil in the name of the church. And essentially, candidates were bound to the Catholic faith through this ritual of baptism. It's a wholly sexist notion, but there you go. This is the reason, this is what came out of the story of Adam and Eve. So we have to question to ourselves, what was it that Eve did that was so bad that the fall of mankind was essentially blamed on her? Well, let's study the story a little bit more. If you read the book of Genesis, there is actually no talk or mention of sexual contact between Adam and Eve, nor was there any sexual misconduct at all. There's also no mention of devil or Satan in the story. In fact, there's only one other unnamed character, and that's an unnamed serpent. So the story goes that God had warned Adam, not Eve, only Adam, to not eat from the tree of knowledge, claiming that he will die if he ate its fruit. The serpent approached Eve and asserted to her that this was not true and that they should partake of the knowledge. "Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods." Pay attention to the word plural, gods there. We'll come back to that in a minute. What I want to show is that eating the apple is actually a desire to gain self-knowledge. So it's a story of attaining wisdom. I want to say that the book of Genesis, isn't an original writing. Not at all. In fact, Abraham is the patriarch of Judaism. He came from the kingdom of Ur, which is in ancient Sumer. He came from Sumer, then went to Canaan, which is modern-day Palestine. So we have to appreciate that there is more to the story than just what the book of Genesis offers. And in fact, in the ancient Sumer, Canaan, and even the early days of Judaism, they worshipped a pantheon of gods. It wasn't just one god. It was only in later times all the gods became amalgamated into one, Jehovah. Now, Zecharia Sitchin, he points out that there was even a snake in the garden is an error of mistranslation. There is actually a story of Genesis, of human creation in ancient Sumer, which are recorded on cuneiform tablets. Now, the Hebrew writers, they were translating from these tablets. The original word used was NHSH. Now, when the Hebrew writers wrote their story of Genesis, they added vowels to that, turning into Nahash. Nahash means snake, but actually NHSH means to decipher, to find out. So that there wasn't a serpent in the common snake-like understanding, but actually a wise person. And that makes sense. Why would there be a talking snake in a garden? Snakes don't talk. It makes a lot more sense that it's a wise person. And that there was indeed a wise person in the garden whose wisdom turned out to be correct. In fact, God himself admitted that the couple had become as one of us, knowing between good and evil. Again, us, plural term. So what this is showing us is that there's more than one God in the story, and that it comes from earlier Sumerian creation. So I'd like to point out, who is the deceiver? We like to think of the snake as being the deceitful one, but was he really? Or was it Jehovah himself? So let's look at some Sumerian depictions. This is the earliest form of the caduceus that I could find. And we see in relics here, the two snakes circling up, again reminiscent of DNA. Now this is attributed to the Sumerian god Enki, and he's a big player in the Sumerian Genesis story. Let's talk a little bit more about him. So his name translates to Lord of the Earth. It's associated with water, intelligence, fertility, and creation. Now, I don't have a lot of time to go fully into their creation story. I have it all in my book. But what I will say is that he was known as the creator of humanity. He created the first humans. He was the protector of humans. It was Enlil, his half-brother, the god of air and wind, who wanted to kill humans because they were being too noisy and keeping him awake at night. If I just skip a slide, we can see Enki here on the left, and he is half serpent-like, indicating his association with the serpent. And on the right is Noah, and here he is offering counsel and advice to Noah, warning him about the flood. He was known as Enki the Wise, associated with serpents, and he had a female companion, the goddess Ninhursag, and it was she who wanted humans to have divinity and become as one of us. And with the both of them, they wished for humans to have free will. Now, this infuriated his half-brother Enlil, who wanted humans to remain ignorant, subservient slaves. So Genesis is actually a retelling of the Sumerian story. However, Enlil is represented as Jehovah and Enki is represented as a snake. And as Lawrence Gardner asserts, that the story of Adam and Eve is a retelling of the feud between the two brothers. Okay, so what is the consequence of the story of Adam and Eve, and what are the implications for the divine feminine? Well, sadly, the story in Genesis sets up women in general as being temptresses, under the influence of the devil and carrying the shame of female sexuality. Now, I like to use the example of St. Patrick ridding Ireland of its snakes. Bear in mind that the climate in Ireland is way too cold to have lots of snakes, so we have to take the story as being allegorical rather than literal. So what did the snakes represent and why were they driven out? Well, before Christianity came to Ireland, it was a place of Druid worship. And as I mentioned before, the Druids celebrated the sun, respected the snake, and also had a high celebration of human sexuality. Priestesses were the norm in the Druid faith, and this caused the celibate St. Patrick to feel threatened by the female sexuality. Essentially, driving the snakes out of Ireland is driving the goddess out and her wisdom. And where did it go exactly? Well, it became hidden. It was driven underground. You see, we're very lucky that we can just go into a bookshop and read any book on self-help. We can go online and watch any lecture, any YouTube video. 500 years ago, couldn't have done that, couldn't have spoken about these topics openly, because it would have been seen as heresy and you would have been killed. How many millions of women were burned at the stake, who were tortured simply by just being free-spirited and wanting to achieve wisdom like the original Eve did? Well, we live in a different time now. Information is available for us at a click of a button. There is no excuse for us to remain ignorant about what happened. So it's time for her resurrection. And not just in society, but within us in self. Because when we find balance between the masculine and feminine energies within us, we see heights in our progress. So I'm going to give a breakdown about the wisdom of the divine feminine. Well, it's honoring your body, essentially. You see, in ancient Greece, they worshipped Gaia and Sophia is a Greek word for wisdom, and the Gnostics believed that she is the earth incarnate. She is manifested as the earth, and our bodies come from the earth, so to respect the feminine within you is to treat your body as a temple. Cliched, but 100% true. It's about seeking healing from nature, simply by being outside, fresh air, putting your feet barefoot on the ground. When we do so, we bring negative ions into our body, and this balances out the positive ions accumulated from city living. Even medicinal plants and herbs, and I'm including entheogens and psychotropic plants. Now, I talk a bit more about this in the book, but there's a reason, in my opinion, why certain plants are made illegal. Now, perhaps it's because they help you to expand your mind, you see yourself bigger than you actually are. And a way to control society, essentially, is to repress sexuality and deem it sinful, suppress wisdom and knowledge and plants. And essentially, the consequence of shunning the divine feminine from the Godhead mean that the connection with nature became severed. However, we can seek this again. We can bring the divine feminine back by simply finding balance and harmony of both masculine and feminine energies within. To find immortality in her is to be absorbed in her perennial cycles, to know yourself as one with her. There's a reason why pagan Sabbats were held at the change of the seasons. It was celebrating the goddess and immersing yourself with her. And to live in harmony with her is to find peace. Death is not her enemy, but it's just simply an aspect of her rhythm. Now, I apply this on a psychological level for things to die within us so that we have space to create. And this is what the snake represents as well. The shedding of the snake, we take this allegorically so we can shed within us outdated belief systems. Anything that's holding us back, we can shed it. And essentially, it's about unity consciousness, realizing yourself as unconnected to all things. And it's a call for wisdom to help elevate your consciousness, because the greatest journey that you can make in life is by expanding your own consciousness. And this is what I focus on in my work. I'm very much about elevating consciousness, which happens in the path of self-mastery. So the perks of self-mastery, why would anyone be interested in doing this? So this is what I employ in my counselling. It's a shift from victim mentality to inner responsibility. Now, how many times have we blamed other people outside situations for how we feel? See, when we do that unconsciously, we're waiting for the other to make it better for us before we can feel different. A shift from victim mentality to inner responsibility is actually really empowering, because when we realize that actually it's me who got me in this situation, I created this, then it puts the power back in my hands to do something about it. As a consequence of sticking on the path of self-mastery is that you experience better health and vitality, because you're focusing on your own personal growth and evolution and not on self-destruction and self-sabotage. Become better at setting healthier boundaries. I know from my own personal experience that this was very important, to have enough love for yourself to say no to others, to having your energy drained. So many healers are drawn to this work, and they often find that have difficulty setting boundaries, wanting to help everyone, but you need to help yourself first. Now, as a consequence of perks of self-mastery, you can experience more confidence, a stronger sense of discipline and willpower, higher self-esteem, and inner power. And as a result of this, you'll experience motivation, a greater sense of purpose, what I'm doing in life, satisfaction and happiness. And the practice of self-mastery essentially leads to inner freedom. And this is why I spoke about at the very beginning, why I believe inner freedom is the greatest quality we can have. Because it's inner freedom from not listening to our inner critic all the time. It's freedom from not chasing the approval of other people, for seeking their approval to establish that I'm okay. I know I'm okay, I don't need other people's approval for that. Freedom from not always following the whims and impulses. And this actually is what helps us get out of bad habits and start creating new habits. Essentially, you're not reacting to life. And I like this quote by Eleanor Roosevelt: "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." It's absolutely true. How you think, how you feel, your behaviors 100% come from you. So, if anyone's read the book Power versus Force by David Hawkins, I'm a big fan of his work. So he, using emotional kinesiology, he calibrated levels of consciousness on a scale from 0 to 1,000. And we can see here at the very low end are feelings of shame, guilt, apathy, rises up to pride, and then we start on the level of self-empowerment, moving up to courage, neutrality, even up to reason at 400. At 500, registers love, joy, peace, and enlightenment being at the very top. Now, when we're on the path of self-mastery, essentially we are raising our levels of consciousness. We are moving up and up and up. Now, if you notice, the majority of the world are stuck in lower states of consciousness for whatever reason, whether that's civil war, lack of education. For those of us who have access to information and have the funds to be able to do this work, it's imperative that we do, because we're all connected. No one is an island. When we work on ourselves, we have an impact on the people around us. Let's move on. So, the services I offer, what do I do exactly? Well, like I said, I am a counsellor, and I'm also a life and wellness coach. I work with the energies of the snake on a psychological sense, in that I'm helping you come to terms with past trauma and shed it. How many of us feel held back from ego defense mechanisms, belief systems, that were created in the past, and they're stopping us from evolving into what we want to be? We can literally shed this, it just involves choice. I help make the process of inner transformation quicker, easier, and more enjoyable, simply because I'm integrating aspects of coaching into my counselling. Now, I give you the depth provided with counselling, but with the speediness of coaching, because I'm working with your sense of will. Willpower is so important. It is one thing to get lots of information and get inspired, but how many of us go to lectures and presentations and think, that's a good idea, but then you don't really implement it, and then you end up just forgetting about it, motivation goes, so you go to the next lecture, read the next book. Nothing's going to change until you actually practice what you've learned. So I said that I am a trained snake handler. Sometimes I integrate this in my counselling and coaching sessions. Now, as I've explained previously, snakes were very much commonplace in the ancient world. You could go to a temple of the priestess. We had this in Isis, in ancient Egypt. Temples to the goddess Isis had high priestesses and snakes there. The reason why is because energetically, they work on our energetic bodies. They help shift stagnant energy, but also in the very real sense that they're a creature not many people are used to. Now, I have some at my stand. I didn't bring them to the stage with me. And it's quite an empowering experience because when you hold something you're not used to and you live to tell the tale, you realize it wasn't that bad. It just boosts your confidence. And it's this daily experiencing of overcoming fears and boosting your confidence that makes all the difference in life. So I introduced this dimension to counseling clients for overcoming phobias, but also just simply to help boost confidence and inner strength. Now, when my experience is in empowerment therapy, the snakes work in a very interesting way. I've had counseling clients who found it very difficult to talk about trauma. And I don't blame them. It's like reopening a wound when you talk about traumatic past. Having a snake in your hand actually helps you very present. You become very present because you have to be. You've got a snake in your hand. And the power that you get from them makes it braver for you to talk about what you want to in the session. So how did I get into snakes in the first place? Well, I'm actually a hobbyist belly dancer. Don't have time to do it nowadays, but I used to perform all around London. And in my belly dancing circle group, I used to dance with a sister group. One of the girls started dancing with snakes. It's not unusual in the belly dancing world. In fact, the term for dancing with a snake is called snake charming. And as soon as I tried it with my friend Snake, I fell in love. I couldn't explain it, but I just really resonated with their energy. I used to then perform with snakes as well in my spare time. And I had a lot of women approaching me, asking me, how do I get into this? This looks fascinating. It's very much a niche thing. People either really hate it or they're very much drawn to it and can't get enough of it. So now I offered this to women. I teach one-on-one sacred belly dancing, snake charming. And it's a healing experience because not all of us find talking therapy really helps. It can help, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Some of us just prefer to move, to let go. I know that I do as well. So it's healing through dance where words aren't necessary. And the great thing about this is that snake charming facilitates a deeper connection to your sexuality and sensual self. I have quite a few female friends who say to me after their first session, is it normal that I'm turned on by this? Quite a lot of this happens. Absolutely normal. As I mentioned in Kundalini, it's widely known as a sexual energy. And this is really great for us who've had difficulties accepting our emotional side, who have difficulties with their sexuality. It's a place and experience for you to actually be at one with what's been brought up for you, to experience your sensual self. And it's all done in a very safe practice. See, I am licensed to work with snakes, and all of the snakes are my own. I've worked with them for years. They're all trusted, they're non-venomous, they're very safe to work with. And essentially, it's an opportunity to embrace the wild feminine archetype. And this is shunned in society a lot. It seems like we either have to be the Madonna or the whore, or the just perfect and pure, or a harlot. So what does that leave for us who just want to embrace the wild feminine? Well, this is an opportunity to do so. And if you're not sure about one-to-one sessions, I do offer workshops. In fact, I'm co-hosting a Kundalini workshop where I have a Kundalini yoga instructor guiding everyone through a kriya, followed by a sacred cacao ceremony, drinking hot chocolate, followed by a static snake charming. So if you want to know more details about that, come see me at my stall. I'm just back there. And finally, I want to end with this amazing quote. It's from Marianne Williamson, A Return to Love. Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Well, actually, who are you not to be? You playing small doesn't serve the world. There is nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. And as we are liberated from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates others. So thank you very much for your time, everyone. I have a stall literally outside where you can find out more about what I do, and I go into more detail in my book, Call of the Serpent. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.